happening along either side of the path.
Are you getting warm?
While everyone had hoped for early night, it soon started to become apparent that that wouldn't be the case. The sun continued falling behind the trees until everything was covered in a cloak of darkness. Now, finally, it starts getting really late. Dave isn't sure of the exact time, but he knows it is sometime between 11:30 and midnight. And Dave is searching, concentrating his flashlight beam in the saplings and brush that's grown up between the bike path and the spillway, but he's not finding anything at all, not even any clues that might provide hints of the missing person's whereabouts. Just nothing, so David adjusts course. He keeps heading to where the trail cuts to the south, near where Cedar Lake empties itself into Cedar River. Here, there are railroad tracks, first put up a long time ago to help the Quaker Oats plant move shipments to and from the building. But tonight, the tracks are mostly empty, with the exception of a set furthest from the trail, where a lone local is waiting for tomorrow's delivery. Now, Dave is looking for a missing person. He's on the job, so he's laser focused. And that means he doesn't notice the glow until it becomes too bright to ignore. When the light finally catches Dave's attention, he doesn't know exactly what it is, but finds no reason to be alarmed. From this angle, it could easily be the red taillights of a car moving away from his position, but he can't be sure. And remember, this isn't Dave's usual patrol route. He's not familiar with the area as the cops who have this as their beat. Later, Dave learned that there was no road in that area, but even in the moment, he sensed that this had to be the case, because taillights from cars usually move away from you, and whatever this is, moving towards his position on the bike path down the track to the side of the parked train, but then the light disappears. All in all, it seems like nothing gets hooked up about. So Dave just continues his search. He moves closer to the train tracks, doing his best to be as thorough in his search as possible. But after about 5 minutes, he hears something, and it sounds like an animal. And sure enough, the closer he gets to the train tracks, the clearer it becomes. Something is on the opposite side, snorting and snuffling, almost sniffing, as if it's searching for something. Now, Dave wonders for a moment whether or not there might be another officer on the other side with a canine unit. And so Dave follows the tracks a little further along the trail as it turns back on itself. And that's when he sees something. It's the red lights again. But now they're closer, much closer. So close that he can tell they aren't lights. They're eyes. A pair of these blood-red glowing eyes staring back at him from the darkness. And they're hovering at least 8 feet above the ground. Now, between the glow from the eyes and the beam of his light, he's able to make out a form standing in front of him. It's important to know that Dave is not a small person. I mean, he stands around 6 feet 4 inches and weighs 280 pounds. But whatever this thing is, it is simply massive. Not only does it stand incredibly tall, but judging from how muscular it is, it must weigh at least 450. In addition to its size, there's something else that is important to know. Dave isn't a scaredy cat. He said, and I quote, "There ain't much things in the world that scare me, but nothing prepared me for that night. I turned my light, and to this day, I wish I had it." And that's because Dave was now looking at something that was not at all human. And atop a set of muscular shoulders sat what resembled the head of a dog, complete with a long muzzle and pointed ears. Whatever it was not a person. Besides how big it was, there was no way what Dave was seeing was a mask or a costume. Besides, who would be so dumb as to walk up to an armed police officer wearing a disguise like that? It was
well, hello to you too from Japan. Hope everything is all well over there in the land of the rising sun.
Into his face, then turned around and bolted into the trees just up ahead. And as he watched it run off into the shadows, he immediately unholstered his sidearm, chambering around, but even that felt like it wouldn't be enough to protect him from whatever he had just seen. So Dave skittered back down the bike trail, all the way to where his cruiser was parked in the electric company storage yard. There, he made his way to his vehicle, making sure to keep his back to the tall fence the entire way.
Jeez.
He would finally reach his car, hop inside, but didn't holster his pistol until he was on the road. Only then did he allow himself a moment to relax, taking a bunch of deep breaths to try and flush out the adrenaline out of his system.
I never spoke of it then, and honestly don't know why I am now. But one thing is for certain, it knew I was there, and it was watching my every move. I'll never go back, and I no longer work at the department since becoming a minister, but I still carry a Glock with hollow point rounds tipped with silver, if, and I rarely do, leave my home at night.
Exactly what Dave saw the night of July 1st, 2014 in Cedar Rapids remains a mystery. He obviously thinks it's a werewolf, while others think that it was still mysterious but less supernatural. They say that a flesh and blood dogman prowls the area around Cedar River and Mohawk City Park. If that is indeed the case, then Dave's sighting represents something not unheard of, but nonetheless pretty rare. An encounter with a dogman extremely close to one of America's urban centers. Unfortunately, the identity of the animal or creature or being that Dave saw that night remains unknown. In 2011, a sheriff's deputy by the name of Kevin was just sitting in his squad car just outside the city of Burlington, Wisconsin. And unlike Dave from the last story, Kevin had seen some strange things during his time in law enforcement. In fact, Kevin saw Dogman on a few occasions himself, which Linda Godfrey shared in her book, Monsters Among Us. But we'll talk about the sightings of his another time, because today we're focusing on what might have been the strangest thing he ever experienced. Yes, even stranger than a bipedal wolf. It had been a clear day, but now the sun was setting, and Kevin had just pulled into his cruiser into a gravel lot on the northern side of town. The lot offered parking for people wanting to do a little outdoor recreation, offering easy access to a footpath that skirted alongside an expansive marshland and into a dark, hilly forest that led deeper into the Wisconsin wilderness. Perfect for a drug deal. But Kevin was still on the clock. No recreation for him. He was trying to get a head start on some paperwork. So Kevin sat there, his engine idling, the only vehicle in the entire gravel parking lot, and set to work. Now, he hadn't been filing forms for long when he glanced up and noticed something strange. The last time he had looked through the windshield, everything had been normal. But now, mere moments later, something had started oozing up from the direction of the marsh. And there, among the lily pads and cattails, something inexplicable had manifested. It seemed to be a thick green haze. Kevin moved in his seat for a better look. He couldn't see anywhere that the mist was coming from. It wasn't pouring out of a hole in the ground or even steaming up off the water in the marsh. It was just there, as if it had simply just popped into existence. And now, Kevin is watching as this green mist suddenly starts shifting and changing. A moment ago, it had been still, but now the thick clouds of green vapor were kind of just rolling out of the marsh towards the gravel parking lot, straight in the direction of his parked squad car. Kevin wasn't about to drive away, but he wasn't about to hop out of the vehicle for a better look. Instead, he balanced his curiosity and caution and just sat there, watching as the low coils of green haze kind of just rolled closer toward him. Soon, they covered the entire distance between his vehicle and the edge of the marsh, kind of just blanketing everything in this sickly green haze. At last, the mist reached his position. It was hard to judge its size, but Kevin later said that it was at least an acre across, if he had to guess. But as Kevin was busy studying the size of the mist, something even more bizarre happened. He could do nothing but watch in astonishment as each piece of equipment inside his cruiser died, one by one. Although his engine remained running, the RPMs dropped dramatically, to the point where they barely registered on his dashboard. The headlights dimmed until they barely cast any light on the gravel in front of him, and then the computer screen went dark, followed by the portable police radio. Moments earlier, it had registered as fully charged, and now the battery was completely depleted. He held his breath. What was going to happen? Would the green mist find its way into his cruiser? If it did, what would happen? Was it toxic? As the minutes ticked on, Kevin fought the urge to drive away, but since the RPMs had dropped so low, he knew that even if it was still running, the engine was somehow being affected by this green vapor that had engulfed his vehicle. The last thing he needed was to put unnecessary stress on the engine and have it die. Then he'd really be in trouble. So Kevin just waited. And it felt like an eternity, but finally, after lingering for what felt like forever, the green mist kind of repositioned itself, and slowly the clouds retreated and the thick haze set off on a course north in the direction of the wilderness. It simply dissolved into the forest. And moments later, every last electronic component in the car recovered, including the portable police radio. Now, Kevin never knew exactly how long the entire event lasted because he never looked at his watch. But he would later tell Linda Godfrey that it didn't feel very long. But that's not the entire story. In fact, Kevin said,
"When I parked in the lot, there was still pink in the sky to the west. When the haze was gone, the sky was dark, black. It was near the end of the shift, about 10 p.m. Luckily, I was not dispatched to any calls at the time, since I would not have been aware of their the fact that none of my communication equipment worked. Looking back on it now, the period that the haze was near me seemed to be a very short time span, but it seemed as though the end of my shift came too quickly. I did not realize it at the time. At the time, this seemed as though it was a matter of minutes, but looking back on it, crazy as it may sound, it could have lasted for a half hour. I do not really know."
And as unsettling as Kevin's encounter with the green mist had proven, it wasn't the last time he and these strange clouds would cross paths. He would experience the exact same thing less than a year later. And this time, Kevin was once more in a parking lot. The location was different, and he was sitting in his cruiser near the boat ramp at Fisher County Park on Burlington's east side along Browns Lake. He watched as an identical green mist manifested near the marine area to the west, then took off with seemingly intelligent control out over the water. Its destination seemed to be a house on an island in the middle of the lake. But by the time it reached the south end of the island, it kind of just evaporated. Now, thankfully, Kevin was too far away this time for the mist to notice him. It never approached his squad car, and because of that, he never experienced any electronics malfunction, nor any of the unsettling time discrepancies noticed in his first encounter. Now, by all estimates, both his internal sense of time and the clock in his car indicated that only a few moments had passed. But the experiences that Kevin endured still left him wondering exactly what he had seen on those two occasions outside Burlington. In that regard, he's just like us. Sometimes there are no answers. For our final story, we head north, over the border into Ontario, Canada. Unlike our last two officers, this time the witness was off duty. The man, who is 50 years old, only identified himself by the initials JS, but his story has been authenticated by researchers, whatever that means. For now, we'll call him Jack. First, a little background on Jack. It's easy to see why researchers were able to put so much faith in his sighting. I mean, after all, Jack had served as a law enforcement officer in Toronto for more than 28 years. He's a family man and is no stranger to the outdoors. He's like your typical avatar of many of these people who experience these kinds of things. I mean, he started shooting at the age of 7, hunting at 9, and in the years since, he has tracked and bagged just about everything there is to legally hunt in the Canadian wilderness, including bear and moose. And it was on one of these moose hunts that he got more than he thought.
People from around the world are watching that caterpillar right now.
Jack was back in the spot where he usually hunted moose, a spot 30 miles
that one right there,
of Sault Ste. Marie, near a little town called...
Someone in Japan is commenting on it right now.
Early on the morning of October 14th, Jack and his brother-in-law headed up an old trail...
For those of you watching who is not native to your
First,
country, that is a woolly caterpillar.
Second, Jack's ATV got stuck in the mud. And after a lot of effort, Jack and his brother-in-law managed to free the vehicle, and the two of them separated. Jack now turned around, headed back down the trail to a clearing that he had spotted earlier that he thought.
Well, hold still so I can get a better shot.
So, after just a little bit of driving,
if the brown
Jack
is
arrives
bigger,
at the
that
site
will
around
indicate a longer
7:45
winter.
in the morning
If the brown is
and realizes
smaller,
that he was absolutely right.
longer
Here,
brown or bigger.
Both to the north.
Oh,
The
that's
smaller,
cool.
smaller
And now,
the brown,
Jack
the
is
shorter
getting to
and
work.
milder the
He
winter's
puts out
supposed
some
to
scent
be.
on the trees.
What a beautiful
Then
little
moose,
creature.
cow, and heat
I've never
to
seen
roar
that before.
bolt.
They're not native to where I'm from,
Finally
so.
ready, he pulls out his horn and sounds some moose calls. Now, when all is said and done, it's now 8:05 in the morning. All he has to do, folks, is just sit there and wait. Unfortunately,
So Japan and the Netherlands were both going, what the heck was
Jack
that?
is frustrated because he doesn't want to get his firearm wet, so he returns to the storage of his ATV. And now he'll just have to wait it out in the rain and keeping an eye out for a moose the entire time and hope that he can retrieve his gun in time for a shot. Now, in some ways, the rain is good because it masks his scent. But in other ways, Jack hates the rain because now he can't hear much over the sound of water hitting the leaves and the ground. But he doesn't have any trouble
Honey,
hearing
since you're there, would you be a
whatever
lamb?
is approaching him 15 minutes later.
If you wouldn't mind.
Whatever it is, it's heavy and doesn't seem to be bothered at all by the racket it's making, snapping twigs and thumping the ground with its heavy football. But the other reason that Jack has no problem hearing this visitor is because as soon as he realizes it must be right on top of him, instantly he hears an unmistakable noise. The sound of the sound of a big bull moose dragging its rack on the brush. Jack is just heartbroken because it's too close now, and the gun is still in the trunk. While the trunk is right behind him.
Oh, there's our little friend again.
Getting it out and gets his chin. So
I'm not.
Jack gets
I thought you were.
now he can see the bull. It's huge. It's standing there just about 70 yards away, raking its antlers. And Jack knows he has to go for it no matter how loud it might be. Well, Jack reaches back and catches his gun. The lid slams, but Jack is relatively confident that it isn't loud enough to scare a bull this big. But when he turns around to take aim, he notices that the moose has bolted into the safety of the brush. He would say,
I thought this was a bit strange, because I've seen several moose in the past that just stood there. They don't seem to be afraid of anything. I've had them stand in front of me for several minutes before walking off into the bush fast, and couldn't understand why this one took off so fast.
and Jack stood his ground for another half hour, but the moose never reappeared. Whatever had spooked it good. Now later, he's able to get a hold of his brother-in-law who investigates where the bull took off, but can find no sign of it. So Jack decides to set up where the moose disappeared, just hoping that it might come back. Well, the hours drag on with no such luck. Lunchtime comes and goes, Jack eats, smokes a cigarette or two, and dozes off, all in the rain, but no moose. In fact, the only interesting thing that happens occurs around 1:30 in the afternoon. And Jack hears some thumping from behind him, but it's not the footfalls of any animal. It's far too sporadic and not rhythmic enough. And at first, he assumes it's just some moose following, but he can't get over how loud they are, audible even above the rain. And at one point, he could have sworn that someone chucked a rock at him, but each time he turns around to look, he doesn't see anything. And so 5:25 rolls around, and Jack finds himself back on the ATV, having a smoke. He stores his gun in a gun bag and goes around to face the goalie where the moose vanished. But he's starting to lose all hope of backing anything today. And as he's standing there, he notices something odd. Not far away from his ATV, although it had been there when he arrived at the clearing, and Jack had looked very closely at it. But now, he can't help but give it a second look. He said this.
I saw a large, probably moose leg bone, lying on the ground about 5 feet from my ATV. It wasn't cut or sawed. It had been broken or snapped. It looked to be about at least a year old.
And Jack is just looking at this moose bone, wondering what could have been strong enough to cause it to snap in half. And that is what happened. It was the sound of footsteps, of leaves crunching and twigs snapping. Jack's heart skipped a beat. Quickly, he fetched his firearm, got into position, eyes glued on the goalie. The bull had come back. The day wasn't going to be a waste of time after all, but not so fast. Jack described what happened next.
When I looked into the gully, about 40 yards straight in front of me, I saw what I thought was a man walking towards me. He was like he was having trouble walking in the bush. He grabbed the tree and swung himself around and ducked and dove down behind some thick brush. The total time of this took 3 to 5 seconds, and he disappeared. It looked to me
Well, guys, I'm going to have to plug in. Always a pleasure seeing you guys. Thanks for all the shout out. Shout out to you guys in Japan, the Netherlands, everybody. And as usual, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
Almost blue on the chest area in the shape of a V.